Yeah, first of all, guys, just a big, massive thank you once again for joining us today and for giving up your time. We really appreciate that. We'll start with a few quick introductions. So my name is Fraser and I'm one of the senior customer success managers here in the education team at Vevox. And I'm also really delighted to say that we're joined here by Dr. Dean Whitcomb as well from University of South Wales. So I'm going to introduce Dean in a little bit more detail very shortly, and then Dean will naturally introduce himself further from there as well. But I think we've got a really exciting webinar and session in store today, and just really thankful and delighted to you, Dean, for kindly giving up your time and sort of coming to talk to everyone really about your role and what it is that you do at University of South Wales involving the Hydra Suite. So Dean is going to talk about the use of Vevox in simulation-based education and research, and a bit about the Hydra Suite that is set up within South Wales. So I'm not going to steal any of Dean's thunder and allow him to keep his powder dry. So we'll come on to that shortly, and Dean can really tell you all that kind of entails. I think without further ado, folks, we'll move on and introduce Dean just a little bit further before I hand over to him directly and let him sort of run the show. But like I say, we will have those joining instructions reiterated further into the session as well, if needed. So just to introduce Dean a little bit more. So Dean is the Immersive Learning Lead and the Hydra Manager at University of South Wales. So he's worked in higher education as an academic for around 20 years coming up to, and specialises in curriculum innovation and interdisciplinary simulation design for teaching and research activities. And I'm going to let Dean sort of take that a bit further in just a second when I sort of hand over to him directly. But he also was quite recently nominated by the University of South Wales, which is where Dean's based, for a National Teaching Fellow. So overall, I'm just, again, really excited to have Dean here today and for him to have the opportunity to speak to you guys, and really sort of appreciate you giving up your time, Dean. We actually also work with the University of South Wales here at Vevox as an institutional customer. So we're fortunate enough to have a really good relationship with them, when we've done a various amount of sort of on-site visits and training in the past. And actually a few of my colleagues had the pleasure of meeting Dean on site a few months back and actually sort of seeing some of the inner workings of the Hydra Suite, which was fantastic. And that's kind of what broadly then prompted us seeing if Dean was available to talk to you a little bit further about that. So I think, Dean, if it's okay with you and you're all good to go, I'm going to hand over to yourself.
Brilliant. Okay, and thank you to everyone who has taken their time out today to join me. In really just a brief summary, I suppose, of kind of what we do day to day here in the suite, and how that's related to and how we utilize Vevox, I guess, within some of the activities that we have. The story for me, really, yes, I've been in higher education for almost 20 years. I had my first 10 years, I guess, were very traditional. So I worked as a PhD student, part-time lecturer. My PhD is in clinical human physiology. But when I joined the university full-time in 2011, a very small fraction of my role, 5% of it, one day every 2 weeks, was based in a suite called Hydra. And at the time, it was installed, but never really switched on. So the first day on the job in that area, I was expected to turn on the power, turn on the computers, turn on the lights, and just find out what the system did. And ultimately, in 2011, we did absolutely nothing in the suite generally. So we ran no simulated activities whatsoever. And now when we move on 10, 11, 12 years, we now have 2 state-of-the-art Hydra suites, where we look after multiple subject areas, multiple groups of students across the organization. And I work very closely with a small team of Hydra learning technologists. So you can see them on the right-hand side, Richard and Eloise, just in that one photo, and Charles Hawkins with the VR headset on. But that's essentially the bird's eye view of the suite. So that suite there is actually what's along the other side of the building here. Most Hydra suites across the UK typically exist within police headquarters for police training. There are maybe 7 or 8 universities now across the UK with Hydra suites or Hydra capability. So we're very lucky within the university in that we've got the Hydra technologies that drive the simulation suite, but also the university provides a plethora of supporting applications which allowed us to really ramp up those immersive activities for our students. One of those, of course, being Vivox, and that's why I'm here today to cover that with you. This is a very quick summary, I guess, of what we do. Day to day, we run Hydra simulations for multiple subject areas. Historically, it was born in policing, but from 2014, we delivered simulated activities across multiple subject areas in the university. 90% of what we do day to day would be regarded as Hydra simulations, but then outside of those periods, we will use the physical suite to conduct a variety of activities throughout the academic year. And we're very fortunate, I suppose, whenever I kind of look back over the last 10, 12 years, we have been very fortunate as a group of people to be awarded lots of, or receive lots of recognition, I suppose, in teaching and research. But most importantly, I guess, year on year, our students leave the suite enjoying their experience with us. So in their NSS, the National Student Survey, across the board in different subject areas, we often get positive responses from them. So of all the years I've been here at the university, I've never really perfected the ability to explain how we work day to day in the suite without people actually coming physically to the location. So the physical suite, I suppose, has three main areas. On the right-hand side, you will see a debriefing room or a plenary room, and that's where students will typically start the day with us before they engage in any activity. So when students come to us, let's say first thing in the morning, we will give them a little bit of information about the exercise generally, without spoiling what they're going to be doing. But we'll also show them how to use the Hydra software, any additional applications that we want them to use on the day. So that might be VR headsets, that might be iPads, for example. So once we've given that briefing, typically students will then move into their pod rooms. And this is the middle picture just here. So we normally run our scenarios with 4 pod rooms at a time, with about 5 students in each pod room. So normally about 20 students per suite. So when students enter these rooms, they will have access to the Hydra user interface, and essentially they'll start with no information. So they'll be waiting for something to unfold in their pod rooms. I will then typically work with academics, researchers in the control room, where we are able to observe, listen into conversations, but most importantly, what we can do from the control room is feed any story, any information that we want them to see. So for example, in that particular photo, on the left-hand side there, if I wanted to send in a BBC News broadcast to all 4 pod rooms, 2 clicks on the computer that I'm working on will fire that information full screen into all of the pod rooms. If I wanted to send an audio clip, if I wanted to send, for example, a radio broadcast, 1 click would send it out to all of those rooms. And what students typically do, based on the information that we send them, they will then access their electronic decision logs in their pod rooms, and they will record their decisions and their rationales for anything that they've been working on. So that will then result periodically in students returning to the plenary room, where we will holistically, I guess, discuss their decision making, their rationales for their decisions as the scenario unfolds. So some of these scenarios can run for a couple of hours, some of them can run for a couple of days, a couple of weeks even. But ultimately, when students come back to that plenary room, we are there to help debrief, discuss what they've done so far in that exercise. So within these simulated events, we use Vivox in a variety of ways, some more than others. So I'm going to summarize very quickly and kind of cover those very quickly as we go through this. But there's going to be a main focus on simulation research and live simulations in a couple of minutes' time. But the first thing I'm going to cover is the induction events. So, actually, I take that back. I'm going to cover simulation and general feedback. So I suppose the longest use of simulated of Vivox within the suite has been related to student feedback during their live simulations, but also in general as well. So when we run Vivox feedback sessions, we've run them for a variety of activities over the years. On the left-hand side there, you've got an example of a summative simulation assessment. So that particular piece of information was related to a level 6 PR and marketing disaster simulation that we ran a few years ago. And any feedback that we collected there was really about the nature of the activity, the specific simulation that we ran. In the middle, we've got a feedback form that relates to a formative simulation. So that wasn't necessarily assessed per se, and actually a lot of the activities that we run in the suite aren't summatively assessed. So they're very similar in some respects, but they're two very distinct activities. On the right-hand side, we've got general activities, and I suppose this is what we do for many staff in the organisation, in that they will come to the suite maybe for the first time. They'll have an experience with their students. They all tend to really enjoy it, and all of a sudden they'll say to us, "Okay, do we have any feedback forms so we can collect that information?" Now, we have kindly put a compilation of feedback questions together in a generic VBox form. So very often what we'll do is provide that link to our staff. They will kind of pick what questions they want to use in their feedback form, and then we'll create a brand new version for them to use with their students. So induction events, only 2 weeks ago, we ran a variety of induction activities for many students here at the university. So when the suite isn't used for traditional Hydra simulations, we run escape room type activities in our pod rooms. So a couple of weeks ago, students would have met for the first time. They would have been using VR bomb games. They would have conducted Lego team building games. But actually, one of the uses that we have for VBox in these environments is that we actually run course handbook quizzes across multiple subject areas. So for example, you'll have students sat in one of the 8 pod rooms. We will feed in a course handbook. So in this example, I think the questions that you see listed there were for our initial teacher education course, so the next generation of teachers from the university. And essentially we got them to revise the course handbook in quick time. It was a kind of quick time comprehension quiz based on the course handbook. And essentially they would compete against all of the other pod rooms in the corridor. So historically, students would get prizes for completing the quiz as soon as they could, but obviously we expect them to put the right answers into the quiz as well. But that's just a lovely way that we use that type of platform across multiple subject areas in the university. So I suppose more related to Hydra simulations generally, I'm going to use this as one example, but actually we've used this type of functionality across multiple simulations over the years. So the 2 pictures you see there, they're actually normally video clips. So this is part of a domestic abuse and coercive control simulation that we have run for policing students and health and social care students over the years. And about I think maybe 3 or 4 hours into the simulated activity, students would be asked to stop working in groups. And actually what would happen is they go to the VBox link that we've sent them into their pod rooms. So that link may have been sent through via the screen in front of them. It might be on an iPad preloaded, depends on how we decide to feed that information in. But essentially we'll get students to feedback on what they believe to be correct at that present time in that simulation. So they may have spent maybe 2 or 3 hours working in groups. All of a sudden we've stopped the exercise, and now we're looking for individual anonymized feedback to allow them to give us more information about their knowledge around the simulation so far. So I suppose so the main example I'm going to give you today is based on our social media simulation. Now this simulation was created back 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And initially it was created, or it was planned to be created and delivered in a physical Hydra suite. And then of course the COVID-19 pandemic hit. So the first time we actually run the exercise, we ran it in a very hybrid fashion. And VBox played a very kind of pivotal role really in how we collected information from our students during this type of activity. So it's a very popular exercise. It's run on multiple occasions across multiple courses over the years. In fact, only today we've got maybe 60 students from our nursing and health cohorts taking part in that simulation. So the examples I'm going to give you in a second relate to this particular exercise. So when we design these exercises, very often the questions I have following these types of presentations are, how long do these things take to design? Who helps design them? How much does it cost? All these questions are very relevant questions. But there are particular phases, I guess, to the design cycle. And the most important one, I guess, is storyboarding, and essentially anything that you see in the suite. So anything that is or resembles the Hollywood production then. So lots of people see the Hollywood production, but very often the majority of those exercises start with a blank Word document. And in that Word document, we'll start creating stage by stage what's going to happen in that simulation. So for example, if there is a radio piece that has to be created in that storyboard, you will see every single word that is in that radio statement. Or if it's an email correspondence that has to be created, you will see every word that's in that email correspondence in that document as well. So it's kind of like, in that storyboard, it's kind of like your Dungeons and Dragons scenario. So you'll be able to read page 1, and if students decide to access one piece of information, they should go to maybe page 7 in the storyboard. Will they then carry on with the rest of the scenario? So it's the go-to document for any simulation that we run. But in that process, very often we'll come across a period where we ask our staff about research activity. Do they want to enable the project to be to allow us to collect research data in any capacity? Now, if that happens, typically what we do is then go off and we complete ethics forms. Some of those can be relatively lengthy, and they can be low risk or high risk. But typically, once we've had ethical approval, historically what we would do is email all of the students who would potentially be attending the simulation in the future. And actually in that email, we would then attach a consent form and a participant information sheet within Microsoft Word. So students would then access the email. They would hopefully then download both documents, read the participant information sheet, and then sign the consent form before they come to campus. Now, of course, when they come to campus, they would then typically turn up with printed versions of those, fine. Hopefully with signed versions of the consent form, great. But logistically, that would take some time to sort out at the start of the simulation. For us in terms of data management, very inefficient in some ways. So if you can imagine having this process in place for multiple simulations throughout the academic year, we would essentially be generating hundreds and hundreds of pieces of paper with personal details on and signatures, etc. So we wanted to find a way to kind of better that, I guess, to make that process more efficient for us as staff. And so I think within policing, actually, it was the first time ever that we decided to take the information that we would use in those Word documents and actually take that over to a VBox platform. So the reality is, as it stands right now, whenever we conduct simulations that are research-based in our corridor, students will still receive an email, but they will actually have a single VBox link for them to access. The students will hopefully click on that link. That link will be open, and the front page that they see will be the participant information sheet. So hopefully they'll be able to read all of the relevant information for the study, for the activity in that space. And I remember saying to Fraser, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week, that when we first tried this, I always remember that the amount of characters within that space were limited. So when we tried copy and pasting the participant information sheet information over, there wasn't enough space to actually hold all of that. So when we first started doing it, it was a bit of a mix. It was kind of a Word document with some information in. Some of that information was at the front end of VBox. But at some point over the past few years, more space became available. And now we're able to fully host that information in the participant information sheet in the front end of VBox. So once they read that information, you then hope that they click on the little board at the top right here, and then they will access typically 5 or 6, maybe 7 consent questions for them to kind of acknowledge. So yes or no, they simply click on their devices what they want to select, and hopefully then before they turn up to the suite physically, we will then have all of that information ready for us to view. And actually the majority of the time, I suppose our students, I would say maybe 70 to 80% of our students complete the forms. Typically a lot of students will consult the information, complete the forms on the morning of the event. So very often before we start the simulations, we will have that consent information again displayed on our boards or on our screens, and the students can then access that information accordingly. Now, of course, once they've done that, before the simulation begins, it's wonderful for us. All we do is download that data report. The consent information then is stored in a relevant research data folder, and that is our job done for that particular part of the exercise. Now, if you can imagine, in previous years, we would have piles of paper, and we would then have to go about sorting that throughout the day or even for a few days afterwards. So it's a far more efficient, streamlined process for us. And actually, as part of my role, I sit on the High Risk Ethics Committee for the faculty. And one of my key recommendations at this moment in time, when I see lots of individuals, lots of projects collecting consent the old way, one of my recommendations straight away is to use this type of method, this platform, to allow them to collect this type of information. So it's definitely a process and a method that's growing within our research kind of circles. So the social media exercise itself, so the social media exercise that is running today, this is the example I'm going to give you. So when students turn up to this exercise, they will visit the plenary room, normally between 15 and 20 students at a time. And essentially they will use their own personal devices, or they will use an iPad that we have in the suite. So for every pod room, we have 4 iPads assigned with the Vbox application preloaded. So if we have plenty of time, what we'll do is load up that application ready for them. If not, what we'll ask students to do is take the iPad, take their personal device, and essentially scan the QR code on the screen at the time, or we'll get them to access the vbox.app link that we present on the screen. So in the plenary room, they would see that information on the screen. And then what we would then do is actually show them a fictional profile, a social media profile belonging to Ian Davis. Now, Ian Davis, he's a very popular person in the corridor. I think we've used that name for the majority of the social media exercises that we've ran over the last few years. But ultimately, with the application, the Vbox application loaded on their device, the students will then go through the fictional profile belonging to Ian Davis. So as they're doing this on their devices, this is what they would see on their device. They would see a social media front page question, the social media post 1, post 2, all the way down to post 10. And when students are going through this information in Vbox, we will periodically change the social media post on the screen in front of them. So we'll normally give them 30 seconds to look at each individual post and grade individually, anonymously, what they think about each individual post. So of course, as they're doing that within the control room, we're able to see that live information update real time. And then what this allows us to do in time is collect individual anonymized opinions on this fictional social media profile. So that normally takes, let's say about 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the start of the activity. Once we're happy that all students have filled in that particular part of the Vbox form, they will then move into their pod rooms, where they'll start working in groups for the first time. So the first 20 minutes or so is working individually. The next 35, 40 minutes, you're working in your groups, in your pod rooms. So all of a sudden, when they go into their pods, we will load up the social media profile that they've just witnessed in the plenary room. And the students will then collectively in their pods work together and commit decisions and rationales related to the social media profile. So what they think about the profile generally in their groups, lots of discussion points generally. So of course, when we're in the control room observing the students in their pod rooms, we're also able to listen to the conversations that are live, what their views are as a group about the profile that we've provided. So once they've committed, once they've saved that information, students then return to the plenary room. And in the plenary room, we'll have a lot of data shown on screen, or a lot of data available to us to help debrief the students. So I'm going to use one particular post as an example. So this is, I think, social media post 5, I believe. And this is Ian Davis posting a chirp at almost 5 to 12, almost midnight on March the 21st, 2022. And the students would have obviously discussed this in their pods previously, but before that left us anonymized individual information about this particular post. Now, this is some of the real data that we've had ethically approved within the university. So this is the first time really we've started analyzing the data. So the spread that you see here for social media post 5 you'll notice that there's over 100 individuals who have provided this data for us. And in the debrief, obviously, students would only have access to their own cohort's data, so maybe 20 students at a time. But that post that you see there has been used for so long that we've actually generated numerous individual data points in VBox. So you can see the spread already of the data in relation to that one particular post. So some students think it's satisfactory to post that information within that particular role. Some think that it requires an informal discussion. Some students believe, maybe the majority actually looking at that almost, that this individual requires formal disciplinary action as a result of that particular post. But also what you'll find with every exercise that we run, students will also commit decision logs in their pod rooms. So for a single exercise like today, we will have students posting information in the 4 separate pod rooms. So a single exercise would generate maybe 4 individual decision logs, but actually when you break the group down, maybe 20 to 25 individual VBox posts as well. So when we look at that whole project holistically over the past year or so, we have more than 20 group-based decision logs created, along with all of the VBox data as well. So you can imagine during the live debrief, that is just one particular post that we'll discuss with our students. We'll look at the decision-making from the Hydra software. We'll look at the anonymized individual data from the VBox platform. And we'll do that for each individual post that was presented. And actually what you'll find is that then we have this kind of holistic discussion about the profile generally, where we take together all of the individual posts and the students and the staff who are facilitating the event come up with a general feel about the profile and the individual. Now, what you don't see, of course, with this particular example is that the exercise continues and we have elements of role actors involved. We have real people in the suite acting as Ian Davis. We also use VBox later on in the scenario, and that's related to some additional social media posts, but also some additional WhatsApp type conversations that take place within the workplace. So it's VBox kind of appears in its bulk at the start of this scenario, but is also used periodically throughout the activity as well. So hopefully that's given you a very brief overview of how we use VBox at the university or within the suite in particular. It's growing year on year within the activities that we run, particularly within the research context of our exercises. So as more and more exercises become more research focused, as we grow generally within the university, the use of VBox will undoubtedly grow as these practices develop. So Fraser, I hope that's covered enough for you in this particular session. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that any of the audience may have.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dean. Hopefully you can hear me okay and see me once again. But I'd just like to say once again, Dean, thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us about that today. I think that was so interesting. And I think, you know, you and I spoke a little bit about this earlier in terms of my view on it. And I think that kind of realistic scenario element that this brings is almost unlike what you sort of achieve in other scenarios. So I think, yeah, it's extremely interesting. And I think I'm quite interested in obviously the VBox implementation as well. And before we go on to that, Dean, I guess one question from my side is, because it seems that VBox has become a very sort of paramount and core part of the workflow and process involved in delivering that experience. Can you tell me a bit more about what you were using before VBox? Was it a bit more of like a manual sort of process? Were there other culmination of tools to provide that experience? Or yeah, I just thought I'd see what's kind of taken place previously, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. So within our day-to-day simulations, I suppose if you were to go into Hydra suites across the UK, some suites would not be, I guess, fortunate enough to be able to access applications like VBox, like Microsoft Teams and others, as openly and as accessible as they are to us within HE. So before VBox was used or integrated in any way to our day-to-day activities, we did use another platform
Sure.
that provide. I don't know whether I'm allowed to mention the name of that platform, but it was called, I think it was called Turning Point. I think,
Sure.
And it was a very physical, remote-controlled device that we used and a software that we used. And actually, we did receive, luckily, when I first started working in the suite, we did receive an excellence award, for a teaching excellence award, using that in our practice. But in some ways very similar to data collection forms and ethics forms with research projects. It became very burdensome. It was it took a long time to prepare and get ready. And I suppose the moment that we had the ability to use Vevox, it just became, the process was far more efficient for everyone involved, not just for us as kind of designing and creating these Vevox experiences, but also for typically the students who would use the platform as well. So as soon as the university brought that in as a formal platform, I know, Fraser, you said that you work very closely with the university generally. So our CELT team at the time were responsible, I guess, for driving the Vevox agenda with us at the university. And I must say, Carl Sykes, who still works within CELT, who's one of our senior learning technologists, he was the first person to introduce me to the platform many moons ago. So, but
nice, that's amazing.
Yeah. So no.
Sorry, Dean, to cut across you. I was just going to say, yeah, we know Carl very well, and obviously, yeah, we know he's been very instrumental in sort of taking the lead on the implementation of Vevox. But I think from our side, we're just really sort of pleased to hear that. And I think, talking candidly, one of the things that we do often hear from all of our customers really is the sort of simplicity and intuitiveness of Vevox. It is typically quite a easy to pick up platform, and you can sort of use it once or twice and then come back to it and pick it up again, and it's almost like that experience has been retained from when it's been used previously, because it is so sort of seamless in that respect. But I think what we'll do, Dean, is I'll bring up a couple of slides here just to share my screen once again, and then we'll have a look at some questions. So yeah, just before we do move on to some Q&A, Dean, and like I said, there have been a couple of questions, so we can certainly have a look at some of those and see what you make of them in terms of your response. But I just wanted to take the opportunity just to mention and sort of plug a couple of things, I guess, if you will. So just to start with, if you have missed any of today's session, i.e. you joined a little bit later on, this will eventually be uploaded onto our YouTube channel, so you can watch this back and then capture all of Dean's content from there. Or equally, if you wish to sort of share this amongst your colleagues and peers, then equally please feel free to do that as well. And then we also have a newsletter that you can subscribe to with Vevox. So it's at the bottom of our website. You can go ahead and click on that and simply just enter your email, and that will keep you up to date on the sort of latest and greatest content. Things like these webinars are regularly posted within there, and I'll talk more on that a little towards the end. But equally, things like product updates and that sort of thing we include within that newsletter as well. So if you are not already subscribed to that and you are interested in finding more information, I definitely recommend having a look and subscribing to that. And then before we move over to some Q&A, speaking of webinars, as I just mentioned, so along with today's session that we've been very kindly run by Dean, we do also have another session scheduled for the 11th of October, and that's kind of going to continue the autumn series here for our sort of autumn pedagogy series, and that's going to take place with James Wilson from University of Chichester, and that is going to focus on using Vevox for interactive storytelling. So again, I think that'll be another really insightful session if you are sort of interested in finding more about the platform or the pedagogical applications behind Vevox, or really just understanding how its kind of implementation can vary in different capacities. I think is always what's really interesting for a lot of people. Then please do sort of stay tuned and follow for that one as well. You can subscribe and subscribe and sign up to that via the webinar section of our website. So the link is down there on screen, and we'll make sure that's referenced afterwards as well. But we do also have around a very similar time on the 12th of October, so actually the day after, our seasonal roundup webinar. So that's going to be run and led by our customer success team. So a couple of my colleagues are going to be running that one, and that's going to focus more on functional applications of Vevox, and specifically looking at some of the recent enhancements and additional functionality to the tool. So we run regular releases into Vevox, usually around sort of 3 to 4 times a year. We run 3 sort of major releases. So that's going to focus a little on what some of our most recent updates have been, along with a bit of a hint as to maybe what is to come as well. So again, if that's something you'd be interested in, then please do go ahead and sign up to that. And then just finally, this is something we run every week. So at Tuesday in the afternoon, we run a getting started or a beginner's guide to Vevox session, and that's very much a sort of drop-in session that anyone can come along to if you're wanting to find more information about Vevox, how to get up and get started. If you're not already a user, then you can go ahead and sign up to that. Or even if you just want to get some face time with a member of the customer success team, you know, if you have any questions that you maybe want to ask around the tool, then you can very much use that session as a sort of ask me anything type setup as well. So again, if that's something that would be useful, you can find all of these on the webinar section of our website. And I do have the link just down there below. So I think without further ado, Dean, let's have a look at some questions that have come through. So I'm going to bring up the Vevox Q&A here that we've had set up for today's session. Okay, so the first question that we've had, Dean, is, are you using or experimenting with Vevox in any way, even further beyond some of the aspects you've already mentioned? So I know you've covered quite a lot there already, so I truly feel like you are almost using Vevox to its kind of maximum capability with sort of what you talked around the formative and summative evaluation specifically. But yeah, is there anything else that you're sort of using with the tool, or anything you have plans to do even further? I know you said you're kind of looking to sort of continue the evolution of the work. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so, well, funny enough, even today, Eloise, my colleague, is running the nursing exercise that I mentioned. And as I walked in, she had a VR 360 experience loaded on her laptop. So very often in our simulations, we are very often confined by the four walls of each pod room and the multiple walls across the suite. So if you can imagine, you know, even just if I give you one example, some of the simulations that we run for policing and criminology relate to crime scene investigation. So because of the nature of our cohorts, the size of our cohorts, very often it's logistically impossible to take students from the physical suite, take them to a physical crime scene, and then bring them back to the suite. So what we've done with VR over the years is actually create I suppose a workflow where we're able to go out to these locations, record VR 360 environments, and then bring that back to the physical suite. So periodically we will drop a VR headset into each pod room, and that will all of a sudden transport the students from the pod room to the crime scene. Or it could be a park, or it could be a football stadium, depending on what the scenario is. But we're actually taking the scene to them. Now, one thing with certain applications in VR, what we're able to do is access web links. So for example, I could be looking around my crime scene. I could open up a cupboard, and all of a sudden I can look at an item and a web link can open, or another application can open within the VR experience. So what we're currently trying to do is integrate Vevox accessible forms, I guess, within that environment. So if I see an item of interest and all of a sudden the tutors want to ask a question on that item in the headset, then hopefully what we'll be able to do is access that Vevox Q&A, multiple choice question, whatever that is, via the headset. So you'll go from knife, crime scene, into Vevox, here's my answer, I'll come back to the crime scene.
Yeah.
So that's currently what we're experimenting with. It seems to be working okay so far, but it's still in its infancy. But it's a great way for us to collect, once again, anonymized individual information from our students as they progress through their VR scenarios.
That sounds absolutely incredible, Dean, and I think certainly experimental kind of encapsulates what you just talked about there in regards to whoever's posted this question. So I think that is, yeah, a very specific use case that I would be incredibly interested to find out even more upon once you've sort of done even further development with that. And I think, yeah, we'll definitely sort of have to stay close on that and see how that kind of comes to fruition even more. So I know obviously VR is becoming a very sort of prevalent tool within teaching these days, and it's being implemented in lots of different ways. So to actually even now see our own tool kind of being implemented in that universe is really interesting. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Dean. I think that's fantastic. I know we're almost at time already, folks. So what we'll do is we'll continue to rattle through some of the questions that have come in here. If that's okay with you, Dean, and you have a couple of minutes to stay on here, because there have been a few questions, and any that we aren't able to get to, I'm sure we can sort of distribute and sort of look at after the fact. So Someone said here, which has had a couple of sort of upvotes already. Hi Dean, I would like to know more about the setup on Vevox of the consent form. How did you manage to attach the information, and what would be the additional questions that participants are asked? So I'm assuming this is to do with a lot of the app home screen content as well that you talked about, Dean. So yeah, what would your thoughts and response be to that?
Okay, so I think this relates directly to the consent kind of research participant information sheet
Yeah.
that I mentioned earlier. So basically, when we design the individual link and the form that we want to send the students, once we create that form, if we go into, I think it's the settings tab in Vevox, you're able to edit the front page of that link. So you're able to add as much, well, a lot of text into the front page of the form. So historically, all we would do is have a participant information sheet that details the nature of the simulation, what the research project is about, what risks there are, etc. And we would essentially copy and paste all of that information from that traditional Word document and place it into that settings front page space in Vevox. So I'm not sure who posted the question, but obviously if anybody in the audience would like an example of how that looks in Vevox, I'm more than happy to send you an example of how we use that at this time. But once they've read the front page or the participant information on the front page, once they're happy with that, the students will then go into the clipboard kind of area, top right of the screen. And essentially all we've done inside there is actually take 6 or 7 questions that are often used within informed consent forms. We've copy and pasted that over, and we just allow our students to click yes or no for each question that we've presented to them. And once they've completed that form, that is the consent information, the consent questions out of the way. And then, as I mentioned in the slideshow, I would then download that information and store that information separately to any research data that we have throughout the project.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dean. And yeah, I think I was trying to sort of untangle exactly what the question was referring to myself as well, but I think you've pretty much nailed it, and it was around that sort of initial sort of participant app content. And actually it was quite interesting because you mentioned earlier on, and I know you and I have spoke about that previously as well, that initially there wasn't enough room within there to obviously add all the content that you needed to add. And I think that's a good example of how we are also always trying to listen and evolve and adapt and innovate in regards to our product, because we had that fed back to us over the course, and we'd obviously then increase that level of detail that you could add within there, to the point where you now have sort of full formatting capabilities. So Dean obviously really demonstrated that earlier with an example that he had, but you can sort of apply text formatting and that sort of thing, as well as the fact that you can add links, so sort of web links and hyperlinks and that sort of thing into it, so you can then take the students off to other resources as well, but still directly from that one interface. So it's quite a nice way to consolidate everything together and yeah, give that student a really seamless experience. So yeah, thank you very much for whoever's asked that question there, and again, thank you for your answer, Dean. We'll have a look at a couple of these other ones. So someone said, hi Dean, what sort of response rate do you tend to receive with the formative and summative work that you run through Vevox? So I know you touched upon this more towards the start around the different sort of examples around the summative and formative use. What sort of response rate do you tend to find through them?
Yes, so generally speaking, we have no real issues with students providing anonymized feedback. I think without the research angle on our simulations, I think when students know that they can openly and safely give you information about their experiences or about the simulation in particular, they're happy to engage. I suppose the only time where we see any kind of drop-off would be when students have said that they do not want their data to be used in any way for any formal research project or anything in the future. So what you'll find is that if you've got 30 students in a room, and there's 2 individuals, for example, who do not want to contribute to that data collection, obviously you can physically see them not engaging in that process, which is absolutely fine. That's why we give them the opportunity to engage or not. They still take part in the simulation, which is really important. But historically, I've not really had a problem. I suppose when we do this feedback, it can be sometimes on the day. So when we do the feedback immediately following the simulation, the response tends to be very, very good. So if we're looking at feedback, particularly about the event, it tends to be very good. Now, I think one thing that this question may be kind of gearing towards is actually what happens when we ask them or ask our students for feedback post-event in the days that follow or in the weeks that follow. Hand on heart, probably pretty poor, and that's probably why we tried our best to ensure that students provide that feedback live, real time, when they're in that environment, when they're with us physically in the suite. And the majority of feedback that we've used historically for our own practice, I would say that the way that we've evolved our practice based on the feedback, 90% of that information has been collected on the day in the physical suite with us.
No, that's great. Thank you, Dean. And I know you mentioned earlier as well that you quite often use sort of gamification elements in and around that as well. And I think that probably relates more to the actual live in use scenarios. But I know you mentioned around sort of having sort of prizes and things for those that complete the quizzes and things at the quickest, which again is a really kind of great way to help sort of increase and boost that engagement. And I think Vevox does a pretty good job of that anyway, but it's a little bit more difficult to have impact and influence on that in that asynchronous environment, where obviously you're not exactly you know, with the students there and then all the activities taking place. But I think there are still things that you know can be done to sort of help increase and look at that, particularly if it's feeding into you know, areas that are core to the actual module or what it is that the students are involved within. So yeah, another really great question, and thanks again so much, Dean, for your response on that one. I think we've got 2 more questions here, so I think we can probably have enough time to get through these if that's still okay with yourself, Dean. I appreciate, again, some people may have had to jump off at this point now, but we'll make sure that obviously the recording is circulated afterwards, so you can catch up on anything that you miss. So someone said here, I am a trainee PCET teacher and would like ideas of how to use Vevox in my teaching in health and social care. I know this is not specifically related to some of the Hydra Suite elements, but would you have any kind of opinion on that, Dean?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and again, for the person that's posted, my contact details were in the presentation. So we do a lot of work with health and social care, but in a simulated capacity in the suite. Yeah. And yes, we have used Vevox for their activities. So, for example, the domestic abuse coercive control slide that I showed earlier, that exercise actually runs with our health and social care students. It runs for about 4 or 5 hours. But the actual use within the suite, I guess, for Vevox generally would mainly be based in that example, I suppose. So when students conduct that scenario, they would access Vevox in that same manner that the policing students would as well. I suppose what I could do probably outside of this meeting is if the person contacts me and maybe we can discuss generally what other activities we do with health and social care in the suite. I can maybe give kind of real examples of where even if we don't use Vevox with that particular cohort in particular at the moment, what we'll try and do is map that across to other subject areas who run very similar activities. So I'd be more than happy to answer that question outside of this, if that's okay, Fraser.
Yeah, no, at all, Dean. That's absolutely great, and yeah, again, thank you so much for willing and you know, being able to do that. And equally, you know, we ourselves can also offer some guidance, some potential you know, ideas around how you can implement Vevox into different environments. And if that's something you would like to speak to us about directly, we can also potentially look at what it is that you're doing currently in terms of workflows, and then how Vevox could be integrated into that. And you know, sort of do a bit of a consultative piece potentially. So you can get in touch with our education team directly, which is education@vevox.com. And again, we can then potentially also have a chat with you as well and share a more sort of functional view in terms of that. But obviously, very much is going to be the case that the Dean could potentially support on some of the more pedagogical ideas as well. Yeah, again, thank you, Dean, for being willing and able to do that. That's really appreciated. And I think we've got one final question here to sort of round us off. So someone said, thank you, Dean. Have you turned any of the simulations into self-paced activities, very much like those what do you want to do? And they've linked an article in here, which will be a little bit difficult to look at just now as we're live on the session, but obviously we could look at this externally off the sort of session. But yeah, I know you've kind of talked quite a lot around the self-paced element already off the back of the sessions, and also you talked about the VR element earlier on as well, which I suppose could potentially have a place in that. But yeah, what are your further thoughts on that, Dean, if any?
Yeah, well, I could probably talk about this for hours, but we haven't got too much. But basically, I suppose when we look at our day-to-day activities, we do run group-based simulation activities. So when students come to us, they typically work in groups, and during their scenarios, they make group-based decisions, and based on those scenarios, very often they may get multiple avenues presented to them. So if I decide in my group to treat let's say for example, a diabetic patient with X amount of medication, it might be that all of a sudden I'm shown a series of information that aligns with choice A, and then if I'm in another pod room, for example, and I don't give that medication, all of the feeds that I send through to that room will align itself with avenue B. So there are definitely ways in which we kind of, when we design these exercises, and actually the best exercises that we have, they have clear, distinct bifurcations. So if a student or if a group makes a decision and it's either this, or this, they will have this information for the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes, could be 2 days, depends on what the scenario is. But actually that branching simulated activity, that's the kind of activities that we love to get lost in as staff as well. And designing them, yes, they can be very complex, but actually they're the most rewarding when it comes to our students engaging with these activities. And of course, very often what happens is with these multi-branch scenarios, the endpoints of the exercises may be different. So you make a complete scenario, and actually it might be that when we all attend that plenary room for the final time, and you've got the final endpoints, shown across the board for all of the groups. It is really impactful sometimes where students know that they've been on a journey that's somewhat related, but actually very different to the pod room next to them. And that's all been driven by their decision making. Going back to the original question though, the self-paced activities, I suppose, in all the years I've been here, I suppose I've never specifically created a simulation for that particular purpose. However, when we do create alternate versions of our simulations when required. So for example, if a student or a series of students are not able to attend the physical suite, what we try to, for whatever reason, what we try to then do is provide a simulation platform or product that allows them to view that simulation in their own time. So what we do with some of our simulations throughout the academic year is we actually create web browser-based versions of our simulation. So we'll use packages that the university pays for and we have subscriptions for, and we'll allow our students to digest the simulation in their own time in a web-based fashion. So they're able to click on a video. Once they've watched a video, they can complete a task. Once they've completed the task, the page moves on to the next piece of information. So you are able to kind of provide that kind of self-paced activity for the students generally. But when they're with us day to day, we typically control the pace of the simulations in their groups. But yeah, that kind of go to page 195 example, yeah, that brings back many memories growing up, to be honest, and lots of the, I think I even mentioned Dungeons and Dragons earlier, but it's kind of that.
You did, yeah.
We make a decision, go to page whatever it is, and then that's kind of through my own experiences, I suppose in video game development as well. I'm a very keen video game modder, and I guess lots of the skills that I've acquired over the years and have helped me on this particular journey within this suite. I often reminisce about those good times where you're kind of learning those skills as you were developing from a very young age all the way up until I'm 41 years of age now, and I still reflect on those kind of experiences as really being essential to what I do now. So yeah, by all means, I mean, whoever posted that as well, I mean, by all means, if you want to get in touch, post discussion and maybe take that a bit further, by all means, please get in touch.
Well, I don't think I can add too much more to that, Dean. So thank you very much. And once again, to whoever posted the question as well, I think another, yeah, really sort of thought-provoking question there. And I think with that, I'm going to hide that question. And I think that looks like the end of all the questions that we've had in today. And I know we are quite a bit over on time as well now, guys, but I did think it was important to, yeah, give Dean the opportunity to answer some of those questions. And obviously, thank you all very much for providing and sending those through as well. So yeah, just to sort of close out and end, folks, a really big thank you once again from myself for joining and getting involved today, but more so a huge thank you to yourself, Dean, for really giving up your time to come and speak to us today. I think there's some really kind of interesting ideas and concepts in there with what you talked about, and hopefully maybe some people have been able to take some things away from that as well. Equally, if there's anything further that you'd like to kind of discuss, you're very welcome to get in touch with us. As I mentioned earlier, you can contact us at education@vevox.com, as well as through the various channels on our website. You've got access to our support resources and an abundance of other material there as well. And Dean has also very kindly sort of mentioned that you might be able to contact him as well if you would like any sort of specific guidance on anything that he's mentioned as well. So yeah, with that, folks, I'm going to end this there and just round off with a final thank you. I hope it's been enjoyable for everyone, and thank you so much again, Dean, and I hope to catch you all again soon on the next one. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of the day and afternoon and week ahead, and we will see you all soon. Thank you very much.